Shalom, let's follow Jesus along the Talmudim way. Deuteronomy chapters 18 and 19. We're going to look at the laws around the Levites, the prophets in general, and then we'll spend a lot of time on the prophet. Moses prophesies that there's going to be one supreme prophet that comes up, and he commands the people to listen to him, and you get three guesses as to who that might be, and the first two don't count. And then we'll conclude with retaliation for damages. As every study, let's begin with Acts 17:11 and James 1:22 to ask God to open his word to us so that we may apply us. Father, we ask you to bless our study. Have us be like the Bereans who receive the word with all eagerness, but examine the scriptures daily to see whether these things be so. By this teaching, enable each of us to be doers of your word and not hearers only. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I love this verse that we looked at in the last lesson, Deuteronomy 16:20. Justice and only justice, or it really should read righteousness and only righteousness, should you pursue, so that you may live and possess the land which the Lord your God is giving to you. And this goes along with the teaching from Jesus. Therefore, you shall be perfect, and we can translate that as blameless or be righteous, as your heavenly Father is perfect. We know there is none that can achieve perfection other than God, but we can pursue righteousness. That's going to be another theme in this section of Deuteronomy, really, as it has been throughout a lot of the chapters that we've been looking at. So let's keep that in mind as we work through it. Deuteronomy 18, verse 1, the Levitical priest, the whole tribe of Levi, shall not have a portion or inheritance within Israel. They shall eat the Lord's offerings by fire and his property. They shall not have an inheritance among their countrymen. The Lord is their inheritance, as he promised them. This is basically saying that people have an obligation to support those who are called and ordained to work in vocational ministry. They devote their lives to the service of God's people. They can't make a living as others do. And Paul echoes this in Deuteronomy 18 in 1 Corinthians, as he's talking about the importance of making sure full-time ministers, or I should say vocational ministers, are taken care of. Do you not know that those who perform the sacred services eat the food of the temple, and those who attend regularly to the altar have their share from the altar? That's what we just read in Deuteronomy 18. So also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. In other words, although we are all in the full-time ministry, a select few are called into full-time vocational ministry, meaning they do not earn any other form of living, and it is incumbent upon those who are blessed by our clergy, our pastors, to support them financially. Now, this shall be the priest's portion from the people, from those who offer sacrifice, either an ox or a sheep. And we get very specific here. They shall give the priest the shoulder, 2 cheeks, and the stomach. You shall give him the first fruits of your grain, also new wine, new oil, the first fleece of your sheep. For the Lord your God has chosen him and his sons from all your tribes to stand and serve the name of the Lord always. Again, this is all about service. We have a distinction here between priests and Levites. All priests are from the tribe of Levi, but not all Levites are priests. Only the sons of Aaron from Levi are officially priests. God reiterates what he said already in Numbers 18, and I think one reason for the repetition and even the specificity of the parts of the ox or the sheep that the priests get is because God knows our hearts. Our fleshly inclination is to not give away one's own possessions. The more we pursue righteousness, though, the more we realize that our possessions and our talents are not our own. We should use them for God's glory. Now, if a Levite comes from any of your towns throughout Israel where he resides, and he comes wherever he desires to the place where the Lord chooses, that's Jerusalem, it becomes the temple, then he shall serve the name of the Lord his God like his fellow Levites who stand before the Lord. They shall eat equal portions except for what they receive from the sale of their father's estates. We really aren't sure what that last part refers to, because the Levites were not supposed to hold any land possessions. They weren't supposed to, marry beyond outside of the tribe. And so if you marry into the Levite, they're not going to have any possessions either. So we just aren't sure. No one would hold any title to the land west of the Jordan where they're going because they haven't been there yet. So it's puzzling. It's one of those head scratchers. It's not really, it's worthwhile, but not really worth our time here to get into, so we'll keep moving. A priest's primary duties were to his assigned town. But what the passage we just read said that they would do, we might call them tours of duty at the temple in Jerusalem. And by the time of Jesus, this was twice a year roughly. We see this with Zechariah, who's John the Baptist's father. Luke 1:8-9. Now it happened that while he, this is Zechariah, John the Baptist's father, was performing his priestly service before God in the appointed order of his division according to the custom of the priestly office, he was chosen by lot to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. Tradition has it that Zechariah and Elizabeth lived about 5 miles west of Jerusalem in a town called Ein Karim. Way back 1,000 years before Jesus, David had divided the priesthood into these divisions. And Zechariah, we learn, is from the division of Abijah. And it was Abijah's division's time to make the trek to Jerusalem. So he did this roughly twice a year. A lot of times there'd be different duties they would do. But on this day, he was given the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to burn incense in the holy place inside the temple. It was just a great honor. And so if you know the story, it goes on and he receives the vision about his wife being pregnant, and he doubts, and he's struck mute, and he comes out mute, and people kind of wondering what's happened because he's supposed to be offering the prayers for the people, and he can't speak, so they're all worried that their prayers haven't been heard. That's a great kind of background to the birth narrative of Jesus. When you enter the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things among the nation. And he's going to give this list of detestable things. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, a soothsayer, one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, a medium, or a spiritist, or one who consults the dead. Those sound a lot like the same thing, like you're doing bad things. We would say that in our day. In that day, they were specific job descriptions, if you will, of different forms of the occult. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of the detestable things of the Lord your God, he's going to drive them out before you. This prohibition here is yet another area where the Israelites, as a conquering force, are told to do things differently, because it was very common in that day for conquerors to adopt the culture and the values of the conquered. They would sort of mix in, hey, we aren't so bad. Yeah, we just conquered you, but look, we're going to worship your gods. The Israelites were not to be that way. Lest we are inclined to have any sympathy for the Canaanites. Some of the chapters in Joshua get a little rough with wiping out the entire inhabitants. These evil practices on this passage are the reason God told the Israelites to drive them from the land and not have any association with them. They are just absolutely wicked. But we can say this and say, yes, they did all those bad things, but boy, look around our society today. Are any of these detestable and, dare I say, satanic things anywhere in our land? Are they within our gates? A sorcerer is someone who used drugs and potion, cast a spell, a medium, fortune tellers, divination, all of that. All of this kind of occultic stuff is happening today. In its truest form, science is supposed to be based on reality. And so that would be an absence of all these things listed above. And so we could say, while God reserves the right to act supernaturally when it's his will, God, unlike the nations, is devoted to fact and reason. It's actually the enemy who's a big fan of the things on that list. And so I'll leave it to you whether this is just stuff in a bygone era or whether today we might still have priests dispensing spell casting potions among other abominations on this list. So in other words, this all happens today, and we all have an obligation as God's people to call it out and to stand against it where we can. You are to be blameless, here it is again, before the Lord your God. And again, this is not perfect. The King James and some other translations have it as perfect. We said earlier, nothing outside of God can be perfect. We're told that several human characters in the Bible other than Jesus are called blameless. So Noah, Abraham, Job, even Paul says, I am blameless before the law. So for these nations which you're going to dispossess, listen to the soothsayers. But as for you, your Lord, your God has not allowed you to do so. In other words, be different from the world. Let's look more at this blameless concept. Peter, Paul, and not Mary, but Peter, Paul, and Jude all encourage us to be found blameless. Jude 24, now to him who is able to protect you from stumbling and make you stand in the presence of his glory blameless with great joy. That's Jude. 2 Peter, therefore, since you look for these things, be diligent to be found spotless and blameless by him at peace. And we looked at Matthew 5:45 in the beginning. We should be blameless as our heavenly Father is blameless. So the question is, what are you and I doing to be found blameless in his sight? If we've gotten the impression that I just can't do it, I'm just a sinner, well, that's partially true, but it's partially a lie, because being blameless is attainable. We see this in the Bible. Make it your goal, and I should make it my goal every morning to, we like to say, aim for the pins, to use a bowling analogy. You may throw a gutter ball now and then, but pursuing righteousness and blameless is what we should strive for. You don't aim for the gutter, you aim for the pins. The more we do it, the easier that pursuit becomes. And some of us have to undo a lot of bad habits that have us throwing lots of gutter balls every day. We just have to keep at it, keep pursuing righteousness, because in his strength, he can make us whole. He can make us blameless. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me, like Moses, from among you, from your countrymen. To him you shall listen. God raised up many prophets, plural, but here the word prophet is singular. There was to be one ultimate prophet, and the command was to listen to him. And so who do you think this might be referring to? Deuteronomy 18 says, to him you will listen. Mark 9:7 says, this is my beloved son, listen to him. Do you think that's a coincidence? I don't think so. In the Bible, there's no such thing as coincidence. So it's very clear throughout the New Testament that this verse in Deuteronomy 18 is actually quite pivotal. And if we haven't studied Deuteronomy, we would miss that. So it's a good thing we're studying Deuteronomy. John 1:21, the leaders come to him, and they know the prophecy in Deuteronomy, and they must have some kind of inkling that something's in the works here, because they asked John the Baptist, what then, are you Elijah? He said, I am not. Are you the prophet, meaning the prophet from Deuteronomy 18? And John answered no. And of course, because his job is to point to Jesus. Just as an aside, we have this hint here in John 1:21 of Moses and Elijah. So we got Elijah is a direct reference and Moses is an indirect reference, because Moses is the one who spoke about the prophet. Next, if you have this on video, look at the map. Look where they are. They're on the plains of Moab. They're directly across the Jordan from Jericho. This is very significant here. Moses is about to hand it off to Joshua. Joshua will cross the Jordan. Where's their first stop? Well, Gilgal, but after that, where's their first stop is Jericho. They move into Jericho, and we have this miracle of them parting the waters of the Jordan before they go and take Jericho. This also happens to be the location of Elijah. This is where Elijah, the plains of Moab here, is where Elijah ascended into heaven on the chariot, and he handed it off to Elisha. And what was Elisha's first duty? Well, he went into Jericho, and he performed a miracle of healing the bitter water. Who is here? John the Baptist is right here. This is very significant. This is where John the Baptist baptizes Jesus. So we can imagine it. I don't know if it happened this way, but it may have. Jesus started in the plains of Moab. It would make perfect sense if he started on the east side, baptized in the river, moving from east to west. And then where does Jesus go next? He crosses into the wilderness, and tradition holds that is in the wilderness near Jericho. And by the way, Jesus' first miracle up in Cana was involving water. It was transforming water into wine. So geography matters. It's very significant that John is here and that they're asking, are you the prophet? Because those words back in Deuteronomy were given right here where John is standing. It's just fascinating once you start to unpeel that. So in case you had any question, the prophet is Jesus. We've got a number of references that we'll kind of sprinkle here and there. This one's from Philip. We have found him of whom Moses wrote in the law. And so this Jesus is clearly the prophet. So this Deuteronomy 18 prophecy is a big deal. Deuteronomy 18 verse 16, then in accordance with everything that you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb, that's Mount Sinai, on the day of the assembly, do not let me hear the voice of the Lord my God again, and do not let me see this great fire anymore, or I will die. They want an intermediary. The Lord said to me, they have spoken well. I will raise up for them a prophet from among their countrymen like you. I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them everything that I commanded him. We've got a couple of times where God comes down and affirms Jesus' ministry. It happens once at his baptism, happens again during the transfiguration. This is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. So we have the stamp of approval. Another verse that the people in that day recognized Jesus as the prophet is John 6:14. There's another verse in John 7 we'll look at next. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, this is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. Also John 7:40, after they heard these words, they were saying, this is truly the prophet. Are you getting the sense that Deuteronomy 18 was a big deal in terms of identifying the Messiah? And we can also see that it's wrong to say that everyone in that day rejected Jesus. Many Jews recognized him, and they heeded Moses' instruction in Deuteronomy 18. It was the leadership that didn't, and we're going to see a scene where Peter's trying to get the leadership to understand that Jesus is, in fact, the prophet. It shall come about that whoever does not listen to my words, which he speaks in my name, I myself will require it of him. We don't sure what that means, but it sure sounds not good, right? It sounds like judgment, and of course, that's exactly what happened. The leadership missed it. Peter goes boldly before the council and quotes Deuteronomy 18 and explains it to them. He may send Jesus the Christ. This is Peter speaking before the council in Acts 3, appointed for you, whom heaven must receive until the period of restoration of all things about which God spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from ancient times. Moses said, quoting Deuteronomy 18, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me, like Moses, from your countrymen. To To him you shall listen regarding everything he says to you. It shall be that every soul does not listen to the people shall be utterly destroyed from among the people. So what Peter's doing is he's quoting from the Septuagint, while Deuteronomy, the passage we have, is quoting from the Hebrew. So in the Greek, it's a little more clear. They spell it out, utterly destroyed from among the people. So Peter here is warning them that this is going to happen to the nation, that generation that rejects him. Just like the generation that did not listen to Moses the first time perished in the wilderness, so the members of that generation that refused to acknowledge Jesus will have some judgment here. Deuteronomy 18:20, but the prophet, now he's going to get into false prophets, which we already covered in Deuteronomy 13. So again, we have this repetition. Why is it being repeated? Not just to, have a skim past it, but maybe because it's a big deal. But the prophet who speaks the word presumptuously in my name, a word which I have not commanded him to speak, or which he speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. If you say in your heart, how will we recognize the word which the Lord has not spoken? When the prophet speaks in the name of the Lord and the thing does not happen or come true, that thing is which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You are not to be afraid of it. In other words, there's three options basically. A thing prophesied does not come true, and that is an indicator of a false prophet. A thing prophesied does come true, but the prophet speaks against the Lord and speaks in the name of other gods. So that prophet is false, and that prophet must be gotten rid of. Then the last option is a thing comes about, and the prophet gives all glory to God. That's how you know it's a true prophet. Deuteronomy chapter 19. When the Lord your God cuts off the nations whose land the Lord your God is giving you, and you dispossess them and settle in their cities and in their houses, you shall set aside for yourself 3 cities in the midst of your land. This is on the west side of the Jordan, which the Lord your God is giving to you to possess. You shall prepare the roads for yourself, divided into 3 regions, the territory of your land, which the Lord your God will give you as inheritance, and so that anyone who commits manslaughter may flee there. This is talking about these cities of refuge. There were many Levitical cities where the priests live, but there were only 6 total cities of refuge. The reason for the cities of refuge we're going to get into in the next passage is to protect the one accused of manslaughter. 3 are mentioned here because previously in Deuteronomy chapter 4, we had 3 established on the east side of the Jordan. Those had already been set up, but here we've got the 3 on the west side of the Jordan. These 3 are to be in the land of Canaan, which they're about to possess. What's the point of the cities of refuge? Now, this is the case of anyone who commits manslaughter, who may flee there and live when he kills his friend unintentionally, not hating him previously. That's a big indicator of how are we going to determine whether this was accidental or premeditated. As when a person, as an example, goes into the forest with his friend to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, the iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend, he may die. So that he flees to one of these cities and he'll live. Otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in the heat of anger and overtake him because the way is long and take his life, though he was not sentenced to death since he had not hated him previously. Therefore, I command you, saying, you shall set aside for yourself 3 cities. So this is to protect the one who commits manslaughter. That's inadvertent death. Murder is intentional, but the test for this is interesting. It's whether there was any hatred between the parties previously. And I think that's really fascinating because Jesus says, what about hatred? In the context of murder, you've heard it say, do not murder, but I say, do not even hate. He says this in the Sermon on the Mount. And how many times, and this is probably more in TV shows than reality, although I'm sure it does happen, we see someone who's falsely accused of murder because before the murder, someone saw the 2 people exchanging threats or angry words, and then that person ends up now a suspect. Again, it's probably a TV thing, but I'm sure it happens. But the point is, if you don't hate anyone, if no one sees you yelling at a person who's about to be murdered, then no one can ever accuse you of doing that. I mean, it's an extreme example, but it's a one benefit of not hating people is that you will never be put in this position of being suspected of murder if no one else sees it. Unless self-defense is determined. It's fascinating. The person who committed manslaughter can never leave the city. And the reason for this is that life has been lost. It wasn't the person's fault, but there has to be some payment here. He or she can't go on living life as if nothing happened. And so they kind of forfeit the rest of their life. And we kind of see this we try and get this in our case today. Manslaughter sometimes carries a light prison sentence, although I'm not sure there's any such thing as a light prison sentence. But there's some sort of maybe a civil blame if there's negligence involved. There's almost always negligence involved, right? There's nothing, if I cause someone else to die, unless they jumped in front of my car and I had no chance to react, then nothing would happen. But usually there's some element of responsibility that both parties bear, and so there is manslaughter, but no one intended for it to happen. But something has to be done to extract justice. Here's a picture of an ancient axe head. This is just one example. Like there could be a number of reasons. You loan someone a ladder and one of the rungs is broken. Again, that's negligent. You should have checked to see that the axe head was secured appropriately, and you shouldn't give a ladder if that is broken and all that. We can read this casually, and we conclude the Avenger of Blood could extract retribution at any time. Although that's probably the way it happened, it wasn't supposed to work that way. There was supposed to be a diligent inquiry, a trial, in other words. 2 or more witnesses of the death were supposed to be required. However, as we read verse 6, it's just as if God knows the human heart, and someone who's bent on anger and revenge, and may be guilty of carrying that out without a trial, and take matters in their own hands, kind of thing. And probably we could assume if he's got friends on the at the city gate, they might look the other way if the retribution was somehow justified. So the cities of refuge were meant as an additional safeguard to protect the innocent. The one who committed manslaughter wasn't supposed to be harmed, but they had to be transferred for their own protection to another town, because people sometimes take matters into their own hands. As the Lord your God enlarges your territory, this is fascinating to me, just as he has sworn to your fathers and gives you all the land he has promised to give to your fathers, if you carefully follow all of the commandment which I'm commanding you today, and then to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, then you shall add 3 more cities for yourself besides these 3. So innocent blood will not be shed in the midst of the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and guilt for bloodshed will not be on you. This is very curious. If they had been faithful, God would have expanded their territory far beyond what it ended up being. And is that the same that's true for us if we're faithful individually and as a community? Jesus says, he tells a parable, you have been in charge of small things, I will put you in charge of many things. If this had happened back in the Israelites' time, then their land would have expanded into Egypt or into Lebanon, who knows. They would have needed additional cities of refuge to safeguard those falsely accused of murder versus manslaughter. However, that did not happen. In fact, Judges, the book, tells us that exactly the opposite happened. They were faithless and they were disobedient. Not only did they not possess any additional land, their enemies possessed much of the land that was promised to them in the beginning. So this is kind of this parenthetical insertion here. If you are faithful, God will bless you even more than you realize right now. And I think there's a huge lesson in that for us. Note the encouragement here that's kind of buried, and it's even set off by hyphens in the NASB in verse 9. Observing the instruction means to love the Lord your God and to walk in his ways. They didn't fail to possess additional land and build additional cities of refuge because they didn't keep the laws regarding tithing, or they didn't keep the laws regarding circumcision. They failed to possess because they failed to possess hearts that sought after God. And I believe firmly we have the same choice, and that's one of the blessings of Deuteronomy. Nothing has changed. God is very consistent. Moses is constantly repeating, love the Lord your God. He says so, I counted 13 times where we have this phrase, love the Lord your God. And then we also see walk in his ways. You want to, if you love someone, you're going to want to please them and do things that make them happy. And again, it's aiming for the pins, right? If you aim for the pins, you cannot help but fulfill the law and fulfill the commands. And I think that is the main element. And by the way, Moses is also arguing that to love the Lord your God, he says God is lovable. We get this old idea that the Old Testament God is vengeful. Not so according to Moses. God is very much lovable, and he desires that relationship with us. If there's a person who hates his neighbor and waits for ambush and rises up against him and strikes so that he dies, he flees to one of these cities. Then the elders of that city shall send men and take him from there. So again, this is not a vigilante situation. This is a apprehension, lawful judges, all of this going on that is the basis of should be the basis of our judicial system today. Hand him out over to the avenger of blood that he may die. So after a trial, then you can hand him over to the avenger of blood, because the witness needs to be the first one to strike. You shall not pity him. Eliminate the guilt for the bloodshed of the innocent from Israel, so that it may go well with you. So in other words, a person can commit premeditated murder and say, hey, no, you don't understand. It was just an accident. Well, the elders are not supposed to just take that on face value. They're supposed to investigate diligently. If they find the act was intentional or there was hatred, then the guilty is handed over for punishment. Verse 14, you shall not displace your neighbor's boundary marker marker which the ancestors have set in your inheritance, which you will inherit in the land your God is giving you to possess. Here's a picture of a Babylonian standing stone. And so what they would do is the markers were simple stones with inscriptions that identified the owner. And it was very tempting for someone, they weren't bolted into the ground or anything. So someone could, sneak out at night and, inch the stones in a little bit. But God's word here is saying to do so is the equivalent of stealing that person's private property. You're stealing from them. And so this is not to be tolerated. And, there's, now we have surveys and things like that. This can't happen today. We've got permanent fences, but still the concept is the same. What's your possession is your possession. Someone else can't steal it from you. And this always reminds me of, our property taxes, right? We actually don't own our land today. We can't. If someone else can take it away from us, then we don't fully own it. And so I think of is raising property taxes the modern equivalent of moving boundary stones. You agreed to pay a price for your land, and then someone else says, "Oh no, you owe me more. And by the way, I can take your home away if you don't pay." So property taxes are kind of a bugaboo of mine. Verse 15: a single witness shall not rise up against a person regarding any wrongdoing or any sin that he commits. On the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter has been confirmed. This topic has been well covered in Deuteronomy, and we see this concept, 2 or 3 witnesses, frequently repeated throughout the Bible. So if God wants it repeated, it must be a big deal. And of course, it's the very safeguard that broke down during Jesus' trial. They struggled to find 2 witnesses who would be truthful in telling what happened. If a malicious witness, this is great, if a malicious witness rises up against a person to testify against him of wrongdoing, then both people who have the dispute shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who will be in office in those days. So note, the priests and the judges have hearts that seek God and seek God's will. The judges shall investigate thoroughly. If the witness is a false witness and has testified against his brother falsely, then he gets a misdemeanor for perjury. No. Then you shall do to him just as he planned to do to his brother. So you shall eliminate the evil from among you. The penalty for perjury is not fixed. Whatever punishment the false testimony would have resulted in if left unchecked, that's what the perjurer gets. And that is just beautiful, I think, if you love justice. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin said, "One wonders if secular society might not profit from adopting this little bit of biblical legislation." I think that is absolutely true. How much more pure would our courtroom testimonies be if, the penalty that someone else was going to get for your testimony, if it were unchecked, then that's what you would get. And I think that would really deter false testimony. And we conclude out here, the rest of the people will hear and be afraid. Boy, I bet they will never again do an evil thing among you. This is all about having a clean land and a pure justice system. Never do an evil thing. You shall not show pity. And then here's kind of this famous, maybe infamous passage here: life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. We have this law, it's called in Latin lex talionis, and it's called the law of retaliation. And so I think we get this practice that the ancients just went around maiming the guilty. But actually that rarely happened based on things that I've read. Instead, what this was to encourage was appropriate punishment. If someone knocks out a tooth, you don't cut out their hand or poke out their eye. That's the intent here. The design is neither to be too strict nor too lenient. What tended to happen is basically a monetary value was assigned. Just like we have sentencing guidelines for various crimes, if you cause someone to lose his eye, you wouldn't necessarily lose your eye, although I'm sure maybe that happened. You would be fined commensurate with someone's loss of wages because they couldn't see, and the same for tooth and hand and foot. And so basically, as the impact of the crime decreases, we don't give the same level of, we don't give life in prison, if you back over someone's foot. The punishment doesn't fit the crime. And so that's the intent here, is the punishment needs to fit the crime. It's not intended for personal vengeance, because Jesus says when we're wronged, we should have a forgiving spirit. And again, he references Deuteronomy 19 here. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I say to you, do not show opposition against an evil person. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other towards him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. So what is Jesus saying here? We should just throw all laws out the window? No, I don't think so, because look what Paul says here. But those who are outside God's judges, remove the evil person from among yourself. Purging the evil from your community is not just an Old Testament concept. The way I like to look at it, as individually, we are to follow Jesus' command and forgive when someone wrongs us. But as a community and as a society, we must be committed to a righteous justice, and we must have a society that's built on fair laws, justly carried out, ideally with judges and others who seek God's will in a matter. So we kind of struggle with this. Well, if we speed, we say to the policeman, "But I'm saved. I'm a Christian. You need to forgive me." If we know the cop is a Christian, well, no, that's not true, because you knew the law and you broke it, and there is a price to be paid. But I think when someone wrongs us, the goal is to have a forgiving spirit. We're about halfway through the law code here, and I hope you're finding this section way more interesting and far more personally applicable than we might have thought before doing such a deep dive. This is just an absolutely fantastic book, and I'm glad we're doing this study. So we'll see you next time for chapter 20 along the Talmudim way.